Hey, I'm Vern Redekop, Professor of Conflict Studies at St. Paul University. So you'll want to do a thesis. Well, you're in for a very delightful and meaningful experience if you have anything like what I went through. I found writing my doctoral dissertation to be one of the most meaningful and transformative things that I've done. In fact, close to the time when I finished, I can remember having the feeling that if people would have said, you have to stop, you can't get your degree, I would have said, it was worth it. It was worth it for what I discovered. It was worth it for the changes that took place within me. It was worth it for the kinds of capabilities that I developed. Part of the reason for that is I was following my own intellectual passion. I really wanted to find out why human beings commit atrocities to one another. And to do that, I had to look at different theoretical perspectives to try to give me a more profound understanding as to how that was the case. Now, when I've shared with students the idea that they should be really writing about something they were passionate about, it led to some changes. One student who was really interested in doing a master's research project on microfinance in India switched to writing about karma and reinterpreting it in such a way that it was a really helpful concept for understanding reconciliation. Another student came into the master's research seminar thinking that he was going to write about religious funding of schools. So the province funding religious schools, it was a controversial issue at the time. But when I talked about how important passion was, he switched to doing a really excellent paper on moral psychology and how moral psychology could be used to deconstruct and understand what was going on with suicide attackers. So when you do a thesis, especially a doctoral dissertation, you have to think about the long term. So you can think about it as a foundation for other things you want to do, or you can think about the image of a web, that what you're really developing is one node on your web of intellectual understanding, and from that node you can branch out and go a number of different ways with further research that builds on it. In my case, I was primarily working on deep-rooted conflict, but that was a really good node from which to really explore reconciliation, which continues to be really important to me. A thesis, you have to understand, is not like writing a book. Some people really get hung up over the fact that there are certain things that they say, this is vital to understand this concept, and their advisor will say, well, you just can't do it. You just can't include everything. Focus is really central for a thesis. And so what you need to do is think about it that you're going to do something that nobody else has done before. And to do that, you have to focus on something in particular. So as you see these other connections, you have to think to yourself, what am I going to do about that? Because it's going to seem incomplete. That'll have to be eliminated. So what you have to do is start a folder that says, for my book. Even if you're going to publish your dissertation, it's not going to be published just as it is. You're going to want to add things. And in my case, my book, From Violence to Blessing, maybe half the book is really directly from my dissertation. But I was able to build on the ideas and expand on the ideas from my dissertation as I wrote the book. So it's a creative contribution. So you have to think what you're doing should really be significant. Some people say that in order to do something really creative, you have to live with a question for 10 years. So Einstein didn't come up with relativity just out of the blue just like that. He was pondering this for quite a long time. And even young Mozart, who wrote a symphony at 14, had started piano lessons at 4. So if you think of it that way, you can think in terms of building on what you've done before or working on something that you've been perplexed about for quite a number of years. Even if you start a brand new question that you're passionate about and you haven't done much work on, you have to think of it that you're going to work your way into that subject area so you can really do something creative. So as you do that, you're really going to indwell a concept, a field of knowledge, a bibliography, or in some cases, if you do field work, you're going to indwell a particular part of the world. And it's out of this indwelling, it's out of having all these things moving around in your mind that something new is going to emerge. So in my case, I was working on deep-rooted conflict and drawing on the ideas of John W. Burton and a number of scholars like Paul Seitz and Oscar Nudler who are writing about deep-rooted conflict and identity needs. And I combined that with mimetic theory of René Girard. So I had to read Girard's books 2 or 3 times. I had to not only read them, but I had to look for examples. I had to tease out different trends. In one case, I was thinking about how he used the word structure. So in one of his major books, I underlined every time he used the word structure, and I did an analysis of how exactly he used it. So as you indwell a field or a situation or a certain scholar's body of knowledge, you read and reread these books, and one way of framing what happens in all of that is that you build up a tacit knowledge. Now, tacit knowledge is knowledge that you have that you can't quite explain fully, but it's like if you think about what you can explain, it's the tip of the iceberg, but that tip of the iceberg is resting on all of this other part of the iceberg that's beneath the surface. And it's this tacit knowledge then that gives you the basis on which you can perceive new things, that you can understand, you can generate ideas, you can make critical judgments because you have this depth of knowledge that you can draw on, and in the right time you will find stuff in that tacit knowledge base that you can make explicit, but it's out of that you can make these really rich connections that nobody has ever made before. So at the beginning, you might read a little more broadly as you do a literature review, and then decide on a focus. So you're moving from a more divergent way of looking at your question and what you're concerned about, and then you focus down, and then later you can expand on exactly what it is you're focused on. Now, there's a particular form, and here's something that I learned from my own professor in my doctoral program, Professor Ken Melchin, suggested that we look at it this way. Creativity involves bringing 2 or more things together in a way that hasn't been done before. So, a very simple example, we used to have horseless carriages, and then somebody invented motors, and somebody put a motor into the car, so we had a horseless carriage, a carriage without a horse. And that morphed then into a car, and as soon as a car emerged, then of course cars could be changed. So we've come a long way from that first car, if you like, that first horseless carriage, to the kinds of vehicles that we have now. So you have to think about what's your A, what's your B, what sorts of things are you putting together? And in my case, I brought deep-rooted conflict, my A part, together with the concepts of René Girard around mimetic desire and scapegoating, and that produced C, which was a new hermeneutical framework, a new interpretive framework, a way in which we could start understanding the dynamics of deep-rooted conflict. And I was concerned about violent deep-rooted conflict where many people really got seriously hurt. Now, what you can do with that then is apply it to a situation, and in my case, I applied that framework to the Okaganisatagi crisis of 1990, and as you apply it to a new case, that in itself helps you refine the understandings that you got from this interaction of A and B. So these are a few thoughts about how you can think about doing a thesis. I hope it helps you make a decision, first of all, whether you want to do one, and second of all, what you want to write a dissertation on. And finally, I hope the end result will be as rewarding and life-giving for you as it was for me. Thank you for listening.